In the 1960s, for her marriage to a Siamese prince, this ordained her with the royal title, a rarity among United States citizens. The wedding was a joyous occasion, but a series of twisted events bookended it, events that she could not cover up, even with an opulent royal lifestyle. Hope Cooke was born on June 24, 1940, in San Francisco. Her father was John J. Cooke, an Irishman and flight instructor, who met her mother, Hope Noyes, on the job. Cooke's mother was an amateur pilot and daughter of a wealthy shipping magnate. Hope Cooke was named after her mother. Unfortunately, she faced early abandonment and tragedy. Neither of Cooke's parents stuck around long. Her father unexpectedly abandoned his wife and child shortly after his daughter came along. But what happened to her mother was so much more disturbing. Hope Noyes tragically perished in a solo plane crash when her daughter was just 2 years old. Noyes allegedly took flight with a near-empty gas tank, and Cooke would later say in her autobiography that she believed her mother took her own life. Having been so young when Noyes perished, Cooke never learned of the fate of her mother's remains. As she got older, no one in her family would tell her whether they recovered her mother's body, and, if so, where it now rested. Following their mother's death, Cooke and her older half-sister moved to New York to fall under the guardianship of her maternal grandparents. But they had no grandparental instinct, housing the 2 young girls in a separate apartment across the hall from their own. Though she grew up with privilege and wealth, it would be a mistake to call Cooke's childhood comfortable. Not only did her grandparents not want the children to share a home with them, but they barely took part in parental duties at all. Hope and her sister grew up with a succession of governesses, and that's not the worst part. In her autobiography, Hope Cooke recounts several tales of cruelty at the hands of her nannies. Raised a Episcopalian, her grandparents would often hire religious caretakers. One particularly pious governess would beat Cooke with a coat hanger. It's unclear how much of the heinous treatment the girls' grandparents were aware of, but it is safe to assume that they may not have cared at all. Finally, the girls got relief. If through tragic means, Cooke's grandfather passed away when she was 12, and her grandmother followed 3 years later. Still a minor, Hope found herself in the custody of her aunt and uncle. The couple lived a jet-setting lifestyle, thanks to Cooke's uncle's position as a diplomat. Cooke's taste for adventure would begin here. After some convincing, Cooke's aunt and uncle agreed to let her finish high school in Tehran. It was an energizing change of scenery. Cooke got the opportunity to attend lavish parties hosted by high-ranking Iranian politicians and royalty. She met many prominent figures from around the world, exposing her to different cultures and customs. It was here where her fascination with the Asian continent would begin. After graduating high school in Iran, Hope Cooke enrolled in Sarah Lawrence College. Inspired by her travels to Iran and a brief trip to India, she desperately wanted to study Asian history. Unfortunately for her, this was not an option for freshmen at Sarah Lawrence, and Cooke had to take European history instead. But she found her way around their rules. Due to her status, Cooke's professors allowed her to write all her papers on India. Her privilege gave her more control over her education. Over the course of her studies, Hope Cooke took several summer trips to India, fell in love with the landscape and people, and would take any excuse to go back. One such excuse was the reasoning behind a fateful trip to Darjeeling in 1959. She was ostensibly there to take, of all things, a typing course. But she acquired much more than proficiency with a typewriter. Hope Cooke insisted on extravagance even when in India, and for her typing course trip to Darjeeling, she opted to stay in the Windermere Hotel, an opulent colonial building. While there, she met and quickly developed a deep and unexpected connection with a fellow guest. Palden Thandub Namgyal, the Crown Prince of Benindependent State, Sikkim. The Crown Prince, recently widowed, quickly saw the part that Cooke could play in his life. Hope Cooke and the prince were an unlikely pairing, and later in her autobiography, she laid bare the truth about their connection. Cooke said that she was a young, starry-eyed student fascinated with Indian spirituality, and was in search of some form of rootedness in the country. He, at least according to Cooke, was looking to find a mother to raise his children. If you had asked them at the time, however, they would have given a different story. Hope Cooke and Prince Namgyal also connected on a deeper emotional level. Both had suffered very isolated childhoods, rife with trauma. The Crown Prince was forced to terminate his studies at age 6 due to contracting malaria. The consequences were brutal. He spent much of his childhood away from other children. In a journal at the time, the young Hope mused that the prince may have had a youth even sadder than hers. This sealed the deal. The Crown Prince proposed to Cooke on what was only their second meeting. Hope immediately and enthusiastically agreed. In a later interview, when asked about her reasoning for the hasty agreement, she could that she fell in love with his sad, sad eyes. The two would not wed for another 2 years for cosmic reasons. Hope Cooke and the Crown Prince were eager to marry and began to plan a wedding for the following year, 1962. However, the plan stalled, all for an unexpected reason. Multiple Sikkimese and Indian astrologers warned of an unpromising year for weddings. The prince's culture took superstitions like these very seriously, and so the couple held off until the following year. Hope Cooke and Prince Namgyal married on March 20, 1963. The wedding took place in a Buddhist monastery where the bride and groom both wore traditional scarves placed around their necks during the proceedings. Hope Cooke now found herself in a position rare to most Americans. She had a royal title. Indeed, she was the first American-born queen consort of Sikkim. The only other American with a comparable position was actress Grace Kelly, who in 1956 had married the Prince of Monaco. Following the wedding, Hope Cooke immediately moved to Sikkim. She was in for a big surprise. Though relatively poor and remote, Sikkim was a wonderful change of scenery from Cooke's hometown of New York. The Himalayan landscape boasted stunning emerald green hills, snow-capped mountains, and hundreds of varieties of wild orchids. Though seemingly adventurous due to her well-traveled young life, Hope Cooke quickly settled into her new home and seemed to show little interest in anything outside it at first. She seemed infatuated with the romantic idea of nesting in her new palace, perhaps more so than with the idea of her new husband. However, she did long to start a family with him, writing, "I want a family so much. I want to fill this nest, make it a real home." But the palace came with one built in. With her marriage, Hope Cooke became stepmother to the Crown Princess' 2 sons and 1 daughter, a role she thoroughly embraced. Cooke developed a deep affection for Namgyal's kids, and perhaps saw a chance to reclaim a childhood for herself after her own turbulent one. She and the Crown Prince would go on to have 2 children together, and the palace felt the strain. Cooke's transition to her new country was not a smooth one. As she was an immediate public figure, the Sikkimese population were wary of an outsider coming to their land and potentially influencing politics to her benefit, seeing her as an American plant in the region. She took drastic measures to assuage this public fear. Hope Cooke was eager to demonstrate where her loyalties lay to the Sikkimese people. Upon marrying the Crown Prince, she did something drastic to show it. Cooke renounced her U.S. citizenship as a gesture towards her new identity. Certain American politicians disapproved of this, and she attracted disapproval from her native high society as well. Following the renunciation of her American citizenship, Hope Cooke found herself removed from the Social Register, a publication in the United States that serves as an index and directory for American high society, typically for members of well-connected old money families. Her exclusion from the register was a symbolic rejection by her old social circles. But where one publication bristled at her perceived betrayal, others embraced the new queen consort's story. Media across the globe widely reported Cooke's marriage, and her story quickly became a sensation with many high-profile publications. National Geographic published an extensive report on her and the Crown Prince's wedding. The New Yorker profiled the couple on one of their annual trips to the United States. Cooke's husband was Buddhist, but interestingly, she chose not to convert. The reasons for this were unclear and especially odd. Cooke had actually practiced Buddhism from a young age, having developed an early fascination with it. Upon meeting her, the U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger remarked that she has become more Buddhist than the population. This was a good look for the wife of a crown prince, but Cooke would ascend higher than that. 2 years after marrying Cooke, Namgyel was crowned Chogyal King of Sikkim on April 4, 1965. Perhaps due to Hope's influence, her husband was a relatively progressive ruler and oversaw a period of cultural prosperity for the country. The literacy rate and per capita income of Sikkim were twice as high as neighboring countries in the region, including India. The threat of annexation by India loomed, but the Chogyal managed to retain the country's independence for now, and things were much less rosy behind closed doors. Cooke's seemingly idyllic marriage hid some darker secrets. Her husband, despite his outwardly progressive actions and enlightened demeanor, was a heavy drinker who would often throw tangerines while inebriated. The Chogyal fancied himself a womanizer as well. Hope Cooke got a look at the Chogyal's sinister side early on. Hope had brought her record player with her to the palace, an item she considered her lifeline to the West. Not long after their honeymoon, her husband got angry one day when he discovered she had not cleaned the refrigerator. In the escalating argument, he threw Cooke's record player out the window. Their marriage faced many tests. It was no secret that her marriage was difficult, but in her autobiography, Hope Cooke revealed the devastating truth. Throughout their entire marriage, her husband was having an affair. The Chogyal had actually begun a relationship with another woman before he married Hope. He kept letters around, which Cooke would read when she could get her hands on them. Though she tried to confront him, he brushed it off. But there may have been other reasons why she tolerated his infidelity. Hope Cooke also saw the romantic affection lacking in her marriage outside the home. On a solo trip back to New York, she engaged in an affair with a friend from her adolescence. But the affair weighed heavily on Cooke's conscience, and she began to adopt some questionable coping methods. To cope with her guilt, loveless marriage, and shaky political position, Hope Cooke began to drink more frequently. She drank beer in the morning and switched to whiskey at noon just to get through the day. The habit became a daily one, and to make matters worse, she developed a dependency on Valium as well, which led her to lounging in bed for days at a time. The pressures she felt then were nothing compared to what was coming. Though she didn't know it at the time, Hope Cooke had married into Sikkimese royalty at a dangerous time for the country. Despite some of the Chogyal's progressive ideas, unrest and dissatisfaction with the monarchy was bubbling under the surface. By 1973, there were widespread protests calling for democratic reform. Hope Cooke, sensing the tension within the country and her husband's weakening grasp on power, attempted to step into the political arena in her own way. A skilled writer, she wrote an article demanding that Darjeeling, formerly a part of Sikkim and now in India, returned to Sikkimese rule. She argued that all land within the original borders of Sikkim belonged internally to the ruler. This ended up doing more harm than good. Tensions reached a boiling point when, in 1975, massive crowds of Sikkimese marched on the palace in protest of the monarchy. Like her marriage, Cooke's dominion was dissolving before her eyes. Perhaps the final thing she and her husband shared was their downfall. Cooke's fairy tale ended on April 10, 1975, when the Chogyal was officially deposed. Confined to his palace on house arrest, plans came together for the country of Sikkim to merge into India as a state under the rule of the Indian government. Hope gained an unwanted place in history. Just 10 years earlier, when her husband ascended, Hope Cooke made history when she became the first American-born queen consort of Sikkim. Little did she know that she'd be adding another historical bookend to her reign. After her husband's deposal, she was now officially the last queen consort in Sikkim's history as well. She didn't hang around long enough to see what perks that brought, but due to her outsider status, Cooke's article received harsh criticism as tone-deaf and unhelpful. It only served to weaken relations with the already aggressive Indian government. Her interference in political matters only raised the wariness of her among the masses and political elite alike, with the latter growing suspicious that she was nothing more than a CIA plan in the region. Her gamble had not paid off. Not long after her husband's deposal and house arrest, Hope Cooke left the country and fled back to New York City, taking with her the 4 youngest royal children, her 2 biological children, and 2 stepchildren. She attempted to set up a new life and began to dress casually to blend in with the crowds. Within a few weeks, she was comfortably set up, but there was the small matter of her renounced citizenship. Cooke's previous renunciation of her citizenship irked some members of the House, and they refused to sign off on the bill. As a compromise, the representatives agreed to get it through if Cooke and the Senate agreed to residency instead. In 1980, 5 years after her husband lost his position as Chogyao, Hope's marriage also officially ended in divorce. But the worst was yet to come. Just 2 years later, her ex-husband passed from cancer in New York, where he too had been living. Still, Cooke had life in her yet. Hope Cooke had once followed her passion across the globe, but now she found fulfillment in the place she'd first moved to after losing her parents, New York City. Cooke would go on to be a very successful writer and New York historian, teaching at Yo and her alma mater, Sarah Lawrence College. Questioned years later about her feelings on Sikkim and her marriage, she reflected, "I'm a different person now. If I'd had a sense of myself when I married, I wouldn't have lost my boundaries in Asia." Cooke currently lives in Brooklyn, still regularly working as a writer, historian, and lecturer. So, although her fairy tale story had a tragic ending, perhaps the postscript was the real fairy tale she was destined for. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the channel for more videos.